Can you hear me now?
Ah, there we go. We're good.
Yay.
All right, fat guy in a little boat. Woohoo!
Fat guy in a little boat.
So the other day I re-rigged one of my fishing rods.
hmm
It had fluoro on it. You ever tried casting with fluoro?
Yeah.
I hate it. I don't know why.
I am not a huge fan of fluoro. I don't know what it is either. Like, I think it's just that I've used mono forever.
Well, I convinced myself to put on some braid. So I did like a
Ooh.
10-pound braid,
hmm
and it is silky smooth and super awesome.
The only thing that I don't like about braid is you have to be super careful. Like, if you get snagged, if you catch a fish, most braids you've got to be careful because if they get any kind of nicks in them from any cover you're fishing, they'll break really easily, or um, they actually, from what I've heard, now I've never fished with braid that much for this reason, but from what I've heard, certain types of braid will also um, end up cutting the knot at the point of the knot. The braid kind of saws itself in two, and you lose lures and fish that way.
I've never heard that.
It's completely anecdotal. I don't even remember where I heard it, but it's one of those things that I heard a long time ago, and it's just stuck with me.
Well, after my episode at the reservoir here by the house where two fish broke me off, I had to do something
Right.
because I was just rocking that Mr. Crappie line, and apparently that's not enough.
Well, and let's be honest, how long have you had that line as well?
Too long, sir.
I mean, that has a lot to do with it, I would imagine.
Yeah, but yeah. Oh, I also lost one of my fishing poles out of my kayak rod holder
What?
and my ultralight.
What?
Yep, I was paddling and I looked back and I double taked. I was like, "What the?" And there she was gone. Wasn't nowhere to be found.
I am disappointed.
Could you imagine my disappointment?
Right?
Because now I got to buy a new ultralight,
For sure.
and that was part of the reason why I changed out the fluoro too. Because I wasn't even using that rod because it casted so poorly.
Mm.
You know, it's a 13 fishing open face, and I had a nice Berkeley uh, rod on it, and it
Right.
wouldn't cast hardly at all.
I think the Berkeley rod that you had on there is the same one that I had. Is it the Berkeley amp?
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, I like the Berkeley amp. I think it's a pretty good rod, so it is pretty strange that you were having problems with it.
yeah. I couldn't do anything. It didn't matter what kind of lure I put on there. It wouldn't cast.
Strange.
So yeah, so I took it all off, and now it's casting a lot better. I was so mad though. I lost a fishing rod. I couldn't believe it. So on top of that, I had two fish break me off. Lost a fishing rod. I told Leah it was the best, worst fishing trip I've ever had
For sure.
because it's been so long since I've had a fish big enough to break my line that like it got to the boat and it did like a head thrash, and when it happened, I just kind of sat there for a minute. I was like, did
What
that just
just
happen?
happened?
Yeah. Oh, jeez. And
You
then
know,
I
I
had go ahead.
I can't think of that's a lie. The last fish that broke me off was the last muskie that I hooked into in the Scioto River.
Oh, I remember the last fish broke you off. That was a heartbreaking story.
Yeah, it was. I cried. Anyway, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I had a weird, like a fisherman's ethics thing happen on my last trip too.
Oh boy.
Yeah, so I mean, it wasn't bad. These guys weren't bad, but I was out there on the kayak fishing, and they were the kind of guys that had their boombox on the boat,
hmm
and they were ultra loud, ultra abrasive, cursing like crazy. Smoking weed out here is legal, so but they were smoking weed. Um, it was just really off-putting because I was like, whenever I'm fishing, I really don't want all that noise
Right.
happening.
Right.
Um, but I mean, it turned out to be cool dudes because as I was leaving, they were coming over to my spot,
Right.
and that's where the fish broke me off. And I told them, and I gave them some advice, told them what I was doing, and they were ultra cool about it. But just that initial experience of being ultra loud and just it really put me off.
Hmm.
Yeah. So they were so loud. I knew what fishing lure they were using because they were talking to each other. So I was on the other side of the lake, and I heard one of them go, "Come on, whopper plopper,"
Wow.
and yeah. So they came over, and I said, "Hey, you guys doing any good?" "Yeah, I caught a bass in the whopper plopper." I said, "Yeah, I heard you. Come on, whopper plopper." But no, I don't know, little pet peeves, I guess.
Um, the last time that I was out, I actually we ran into a little bit of a fishing pet peeve. We were we had originally went out to fish below Lake White in um, PP Creek below the dam, which, by the way, is a complete and total waste of time. But I know that now. If I was fishing for carp, it would have been amazing because there were carp everywhere. Um, but after we were trying to go through PP Creek and get to the Scioto River and fish at the confluence of the two because myself, fishing buddy Justin, and one of his friends had all three heard that was a really good walleye, white bass, and striper spot. So we were gonna go down and fish there, but the way down the creek was blocked by a pretty fresh log jam, so um, we had to turn around and go back. So we decided we would just cut our losses and try to fish up in the lake. And against my better judgment, during the warm part of the summer, we just went to the main boat ramp and put in and paddled um, down the shoreline and tried to fish. Um, the pleasure boaters, that share the water with you, obviously they're going to do their thing. That's totally understandable. Kind of annoying when one of their big super boats zooms past you towing somebody and you got to deal with the wake for the next 20 minutes because they do it 8 or 10 times. But they're doing what they came to the lake to do. It doesn't stop me from doing what I'm doing. It's just a little annoying. The problem that I have is the guys that are in bass boats fishing that will creep past me within a half cast distance and throw as much wake as they can to try to push me out of one of their spots.
Do you think
And
that's what was really happening?
well, the reason that I say that that's what was happening is because this same boat went past us 2 or 3 times in the same spot. And he would approach us kind of fast, and then he would kick his boat way down and just throw the wake like crazy, right? Well, when we finally decided that we had beat our heads against the wall, not catching anything enough, we left. Dude in the bass boat saw us leaving and put the hammer down. He came flying across the lake and posted up right where we left no sooner than we did.
Oh, see, now that's no good.
That is one of my big pet peeves, right? Like, I get it. Technically, to the big bass boat guys, technically I'm not in a boat. It doesn't even have a motor. But I have as much right to be on the water as those guys do. And to treat a fellow sportsman, a fellow angler that way is just the lowest of the low, in my opinion.
Yeah, and you see that across all recreation types. We'll just let's just use like the gambler episode we just did. Those guys are out in the forest in their cars, motor vehicles on trails.
Hmm.
The hikers hate them, but both groups have just as much right to be on that trail as each other.
Yeah.
It's a weird thing because you're right. Everybody's got the right. It's just whether you can tolerate each other.
Well, I think the big thing that everybody forgets, right? And it goes both ways. Like, obviously, I'm sure there are people that fish from bass boats that have had kayakers paddle right between the boat and where they're fishing and just been like, "Hey, buddy, how's it going? I'm just paddling through." You know, I'm sure that happens. But on the flip side, right? Like, as an angler of any sort, whether I'm in a bass boat, I'm in a kayak, I'm on the bank, I'm wading, my main concerns when I'm out there, number one is to have fun, right? Number two is to be respectful. And that's, to me, that number two rule is really tied for number one. Like, I want to make sure that I'm being respectful not only to the environment that I'm in, but to anybody that may be around me while I'm fishing or anybody that may come after me when I'm done. You know,
It,
go ahead.
I'll say beyond that, it's also a safety thing too, right? Because that guy comes barreling up at you in his bass boat. What if his throttle sticks or something happens to his steering?
Yeah,
It's irresponsible all the way around.
exactly. And I, I hate to do it because I always feel like anytime that I talk about fishing and being outdoors long enough, I can um, draw lines to real, quote unquote, real life, something that outside of hobbies. And I find that the big thing to me is that a little bit of respect goes a long way, right? And I know that's a whole nother can of worms that we don't want to get into because of the current political climate and everything going on. I get it. We're not that kind of podcast. But it does irk me when I'm fishing and somebody else is fishing, especially somebody that has the ability to literally go anywhere in the lake. And my fat self is paddling my boat to get where I can go. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's I don't know. It's a very strange thing.
That's for sure.
Hey, if you got something to talk about, go ahead and talk. I got to take a bio break real quick.
Okay. So one of the things that we ran into when we were kayaking, the PP Creek that I was talking about, is evidence that other people um, kayak it regularly. Um, we saw a couple different tracks from people dragging kayaks and things like that, um, and some trash, and that's a little upsetting. But it was kind of a bummer that um, we had to turn around because the section of PP Creek that we fished, one of the reasons that we didn't really catch anything or see any fish other than carp is because the bottom runs, or the creek itself runs through farmland. So the bottom structure, the whatever you want to call it, the type of bottom that this creek had was mud and clay. So we were hoping that we would be able to get to the Scioto River because the Scioto River has a nice rocky bottom, and that we would be able to catch some sport fish off of that rocky bottom. But unfortunately, it seemed as though the farmer that owned the property